There are two types of people in this world, winners and everyone else. The harsh reality that nobody wants to tell you is that most people are programmed from birth to lose. They're taught to play it safe, to be humble, to share, and to believe that everyone deserves a participation trophy. This is the biggest lie ever sold to humanity. While you've been conditioned to think small, the real winners have been operating from a completely different playbook. They think differently, they move differently, and most importantly, they destroy their competition without mercy or hesitation. They understand something that 99% of people will never grasp. Winning isn't about being the best, it's about making sure everyone else loses. This audiobook will rewire your brain to think like a true winner. By the time you finish listening, you won't just compete, you'll dominate. You won't just participate, you'll control the game entirely. But here's the warning, this transformation isn't for everyone. Once you start thinking like a winner, you can never go back to being average. You'll see the world for what it really is, a battlefield where only the mentally strongest survive. The strategies you're about to learn have been used by billionaires, world leaders, and industry titans to systematically destroy their competition. These aren't feel-good motivational concepts. These are psychological weapons designed to give you an unfair advantage in every area of your life. If you're ready to stop being a victim of circumstance and start being the predator in every situation, then let's begin your transformation into an unstoppable winning machine. Chapter 1. The Loser's Mindset. That's destroying your life. Right now, as you listen to this, you're probably operating from a loser's mindset and you don't even know it. This isn't an insult, it's a diagnosis. The loser's mindset has been systematically programmed into you by a society that needs workers, not winners. It needs followers, not leaders. It needs people who accept their place in the hierarchy instead of destroying it. The first characteristic of a loser's mindset is believing that success is about fairness. Losers think that if they work hard, follow the rules, and be good people, the universe will reward them. This is fantasy thinking. The universe doesn't care about your feelings, your effort, or your good intentions. It only rewards results, and winners understand this at a cellular level. Losers also believe in the myth of abundance. They think there's enough success, happiness, and wealth for everyone. This is mathematically impossible. If everyone could be successful, then success would be meaningless. Success is valuable precisely because it's scarce. For you to win, someone else must lose. For you to get promoted, someone else must be passed over. For your business to dominate, your competitors must fail. Winners embrace this zero-sum reality, while losers live in denial about it. Another hallmark of loser thinking is seeking validation from others. Losers need approval, permission, and encouragement from family, friends, and society before they make moves. They ask for opinions when they should be making decisions. They seek consensus when they should be taking charge. Winners operate independently. They don't need anyone's permission to dominate their field. Losers also have an external locus of control. They believe their success or failure depends on external circumstances, luck, timing, or other people's decisions. When they fail, they blame the economy, their boss, their lack of connections, or their circumstances. Winners have an internal locus of control. They take responsibility for everything that happens to them, both good and bad, because they understand that this mindset gives them power. The loser's mindset is also characterized by scarcity thinking. Losers hoard information, opportunities, and resources because they fear there isn't enough to go around. They're afraid to take risks because they might lose what little they have. Winners think abundantly about their own capabilities while thinking strategically about how to limit their competition's access to resources. Perhaps most damaging is the loser's belief in playing fair. They think success should be earned through honest work, good character, and playing by the rules. They've been brainwashed into thinking that winning through superior strategy, psychological advantage, or competitive destruction is somehow wrong. Winners understand that fairness is a luxury they can't afford if they want to dominate. Losers also suffer from what I call comparison paralysis. They're so busy looking at what everyone else is doing that they never develop their own winning strategy. They copy instead of create. They follow trends instead of setting them. They react to their competition instead of making their competition react to them. The final characteristic of loser thinking is the belief that winning is temporary. Losers think that success is fleeting, that what goes up must come down, and that they should be grateful for whatever small victories they achieve. Winners understand that winning is a permanent state of mind. It's not about achieving one goal, it's about creating a system for continuous domination. If you recognize yourself in any of these patterns, don't panic. Recognition is the first step toward transformation. The fact that you're listening to this audiobook means you're already questioning the loser programming that's been installed in your mind. The next step is to completely rewire your thinking to operate from a winner's mindset, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Chapter 2. The Winner's Brain. How Champions Think Differently. Winners don't just think differently, they literally have different brain structures than losers. Neuroscience has proven that successful people have enhanced activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for strategic thinking, impulse control, and long-term planning. They also have reduced activity in the amygdala, the fear center of the brain. This isn't genetic luck, this is the result of years of conditioning their minds to think like predators instead of prey. The winner's brain operates on what I call predator consciousness. Every decision, every interaction, and every opportunity is evaluated through one simple filter. How does this help me win? And how does this help me destroy my competition? Winners don't see other people as friends, colleagues, or peers. They see them as either assets or obstacles. Assets are people who can help them win. Obstacles are people who need to be neutralized, eliminated, or converted. Winners think in terms of power dynamics, not fairness. In every interaction, they immediately assess who has power, who wants power, and how they can gain more power. They understand that life is not a collaboration, it's a competition for limited resources, status, and influence. While losers worry about being liked, winners focus on being respected and feared. The winner's brain is also wired for strategic thinking. Winners don't just react to what's happening now, they're constantly planning 3, 5, and 10 moves ahead. They think like chess masters, seeing not just the immediate consequences of their actions, but the long-term implications. When a winner makes a decision, they've already gamed out how their competition will respond, and they have counter-strategies ready. Winners also have what psychologists call high tolerance for ambiguity. They can operate effectively in uncertain situations because they understand that uncertainty creates opportunity. While losers need security, predictability, and clear instructions, winners thrive in chaos, because chaos allows them to reshape the game in their favor. Another key difference is that winners think in systems, not goals. Losers set goals and hope to achieve them. Winners build systems that make success inevitable. They create processes, routines, and structures that automatically generate winning outcomes. They don't just want to win once, they want to create a machine that wins continuously. The winner's brain is also characterized by what I call tactical empathy. This isn't the warm, fuzzy empathy that losers practice. This is the ability to understand exactly what other people want, need, and fear, so you can use that information strategically. Winners study human psychology not to help people, but to influence, control, and outmaneuver them. Winners also have a unique relationship with failure. Losers see failure as evidence that they're not good enough. Winners see failure as data. Every failure teaches them something about their competition, their market, or their strategy. They fail fast, fail cheap, and fail forward, constantly adapting and improving their approach. The winner's brain operates on delayed gratification, but with a twist. Winners aren't just willing to sacrifice now for future gains, they're willing to sacrifice other people's present and future for their own advantage. They understand that in a competitive world, your gain often requires someone else's loss, and they're comfortable with that trade-off. Winners also think probabilistically, not emotionally. They make decisions based on odds, outcomes, and risk-reward ratios, not on how they feel about a situation. They can cut losses, quickly abandon failing strategies, and pivot to new approaches without emotional attachment to their previous decisions. Perhaps most importantly, winners have what I call ownership mentality. They don't just take responsibility for their own results, they take ownership of entire situations. If they're in a failing company, they don't just try to do their job better, they figure out how to take control and fix the entire organization. If they're in a competitive market, they don't just try to get their fair share, they figure out how to dominate and eliminate the competition. The winner's brain is constantly asking different questions than the loser's brain. Instead of asking, why me, winners ask, how can I use this? Instead of asking, what if I fail, winners ask, what if I succeed beyond my wildest dreams? Instead of asking, how can I fit in, winners ask, how can I stand out? Instead of asking, how can I avoid conflict, winners ask, how can I win this conflict decisively? This isn't just positive thinking, this is predator thinking. It's the mental operating system of people who don't just succeed, but who dominate their fields so completely that their competition gives up. And the beautiful thing about the brain is that it's plastic. You can rewire it. You can upgrade your mental operating system from loser to winner, but it requires you to completely abandon everything you've been taught about how success works. Chapter 3. The Hierarchy of Human Competition. Most people live in denial about human nature. They pretend that we're all equal, that everyone deserves the same opportunities, and that competition is somehow unnatural or wrong. This is naive thinking that keeps losers trapped at the bottom of the hierarchy. Winners understand that humans are hierarchical creatures, and that every interaction, every relationship, and every situation involves a power dynamic with someone on top and someone on bottom. The hierarchy of human competition has 5 distinct levels, and understanding these levels is crucial to your transformation into a winner. At the bottom level, you have the victims. These are people who have completely given up on winning. They've accepted their position at the bottom of the hierarchy, and they spend their time complaining about how unfair life is. They blame everyone and everything for their failures, and they've convinced themselves that their lack of success is someone else's fault. The second level consists of the competitors. These people understand that life is competitive, but they play by everyone else's rules. They work hard, they follow the conventional wisdom, and they hope that their effort will be rewarded. They're better than victims because they're at least trying, but they're still operating from a fundamentally flawed understanding of how winning works. The third level is where you find the players. These people have figured out that success isn't just about hard work, it's about strategy, psychology, and influence. They've learned to read people to build networks and to position themselves advantageously. They're starting to think like winners, but they're still constrained by their belief that they need to play fair. The fourth level contains the predators. These are people who understand that winning requires the willingness to destroy your competition. They're not limited by conventional morality or social expectations. They do whatever it takes to win, and they're comfortable with the fact that their success comes at other people's expense. They've embraced the zero-sum nature of high-level competition. At the top of the hierarchy, you have the apex predators. These are the people who don't just win, they control the game itself. They set the rules, they determine what winning means, and they create systems that automatically eliminate their competition. They're not just successful, they're dominant, to the point where other people don't even try to compete with them. Understanding this hierarchy is crucial because it determines your strategy. If you're trying to move from competitor to player, you need to develop strategic thinking and social skills. If you're trying to move from player to predator, you need to abandon your attachment to fairness and embrace tactical ruthlessness. If you're trying to reach apex predator status, you need to learn how to control entire systems and markets. The hierarchy also explains why most success advice doesn't work. Most self-help books are written by competitors for competitors. They teach you how to work harder, set better goals, and stay motivated. But if you want to reach the top levels of the hierarchy, you need completely different strategies. You need to learn how to think strategically, how to influence and control other people, and how to systematically destroy your competition. Winners also understand that the hierarchy is dynamic. People move up and down based on their actions, their mindset, and their strategic capabilities. Just because someone is above you today doesn't mean they'll stay there. And just because you're below someone today doesn't mean you have to accept that position permanently. The key to moving up the hierarchy is understanding that each level requires different skills and different thinking. Victims need to develop personal responsibility. Competitors need to develop strategic thinking. Players need to develop psychological sophistication. Predators need to develop systematic dominance. And apex predators need to develop the ability to control entire ecosystems. Most people get stuck at their current level because they try to use the same strategies that got them there to move to the next level. But what works at one level often becomes a limitation at the next level. The humility that helps you survive as a competitor becomes a weakness when you're trying to become a predator. The aggression that helps you succeed as a predator becomes counterproductive when you're trying to reach apex status. Winners are constantly evolving their approach based on their position in the hierarchy and their goals for advancement. They're not attached to any particular strategy or identity, they're focused on results. If being aggressive works, they're aggressive. If being subtle works, they're subtle. If being collaborative works, they're collaborative. They adapt their approach to what the situation requires. The hierarchy also explains why winners seem to have different rules than everyone else. It's not that they're breaking the rules, it's that they're operating at a level where different rules apply. The social conventions that govern behavior at the competitor level don't apply at the predator level. The ethical constraints that limit players don't limit apex predators. This might sound harsh or unfair, but it's simply how human hierarchies work. Every organization, every industry, and every society has these same dynamics. The people at the top operate by different rules than the people at the bottom. If you want to reach the top, you need to understand and accept this reality instead of fighting against it. Chapter 4. The Psychology of Domination. Domination isn't just about being better than your competition. It's about being so superior that your competition stops trying. True winners don't just want to win, they want to win so decisively that their dominance becomes unquestionable. This requires understanding the psychology of how to break your competition's will to compete. The first principle of domination psychology is overwhelming superiority. When you're just slightly better than your competition, they'll keep trying to catch up. But when you're dramatically superior, they'll become demoralized and start looking for easier targets. Winners understand that the goal isn't to be 10% better, it's to be 10 times better. They don't just want to edge out their competition, they want to make their competition irrelevant. The second principle is psychological warfare. Winners understand that competition is as much mental as it is practical. They use intimidation, misdirection, and mind games to get inside their competitors' heads. They make their competition doubt themselves, second-guess their strategies, and waste energy on defensive moves instead of offensive action. One of the most powerful psychological weapons is the demonstration of effortless superiority. When you make winning look easy, your competition starts to believe that they can't compete with you. They assume you have some unfair advantage or secret knowledge that they lack. This creates a psychological barrier that's often more effective than any practical obstacle. Winners also use what I call strategic unpredictability. While they're internally systematic and disciplined, they appear unpredictable to their competition. This keeps their competitors off balance, never quite sure what they're going to do next. Unpredictability creates anxiety, and anxiety leads to poor decision-making. Another key element of domination psychology is controlling the narrative. Winners don't just compete, they control how the competition is perceived and discussed. They position themselves as the obvious leaders and frame their competitors as struggling underdogs. They use media relationships and public perception to create momentum that becomes self-reinforcing. Winners also understand the power of social proof in domination. When other people start treating you as the obvious winner, your competition begins to internalize that perception. They start acting like they've already lost, even before the competition is decided. This is why winners work so hard to cultivate relationships with influencers, media figures, and industry leaders. The psychology of domination also involves creating multiple pressure points simultaneously. Instead of competing on just one dimension, winners attack from multiple angles at once. They outperform on quality while undercutting on price. They dominate market share while also controlling distribution channels. They overwhelm their competition's ability to respond effectively. Winners also use what psychologists call learned helplessness against their competition. By consistently outmaneuvering their competitors, they condition them to believe that resistance is futile. Eventually, their competition stops trying innovative strategies and falls into reactive defensive patterns that guarantee their continued failure. Time pressure is another psychological weapon that winners use masterfully. They force their competition to make decisions quickly before they've had time to think through all the implications. They create artificial deadlines, accelerate market cycles, and generally keep their competition in a state of constant reaction instead of strategic planning. Winners also understand the psychology of resource depletion. They force their competition to spend money, time, and energy on battles they can't win. While their competition is exhausted from fighting losing battles, winners are conserving their resources for the final decisive moves that will eliminate their competition entirely. The most sophisticated form of domination psychology is making your competition defeat themselves. Instead of directly attacking you, position the competitive landscape so that your competitors' natural responses work against them. You make them paranoid, so they waste resources on imaginary threats. You make them overconfident, so they make strategic mistakes. You manipulate their decision-making process, so that every choice they make weakens their position. Winners also use scarcity psychology to their advantage. They create or control access to limited resources that their competition needs. This could be talent distribution channels, capital, or customer attention. By controlling scarcity, they force their competition into desperation moves that usually backfire. Perhaps most importantly, winners understand that domination is as much about perception as reality. If your competition believes you're unbeatable, they'll start acting like you're unbeatable. If customers believe you're the obvious choice, they'll stop seriously considering alternatives. If investors believe you're destined to win, they'll stop funding your competitors. The goal of domination psychology isn't just to win today's competition, it's to establish such overwhelming superiority that future competition becomes impossible. You want to create a situation where anyone thinking about competing with you immediately realizes it's hopeless and decides to do something else instead. This level of psychological domination requires you to think like a grand master chess player, always planning multiple moves ahead and considering not just what you're going to do, but how your competition will react and how you can use those reactions against them. It's sophisticated, strategic thinking combined with deep understanding of human psychology and competitive dynamics. Chapter 5. Strategic Thinking. Planning your competitive destruction. Most people confuse planning with strategic thinking. Planning is making a list of things you want to accomplish. Strategic thinking is designing a system that makes your success inevitable, while simultaneously making your competition's failure equally inevitable. Winners don't just plan to succeed. They plan to dominate so completely that their competition has no viable path to victory. The foundation of strategic thinking is what military strategists call terrain analysis. Before you can develop a winning strategy, you need to understand the competitive landscape better than anyone else. This means mapping out all the players, their strengths and weaknesses, their resources and limitations, and their likely strategies. Most people study their direct competitors, but winners study the entire ecosystem, including suppliers, customers, regulators, and potential new entrants. The next level of strategic thinking involves identifying leverage points. These are places where a small amount of effort can create disproportionate results. Winners look for situations where they can apply pressure that forces their competition into impossible choices. They create scenarios where their competitors have to choose between short-term survival and long-term competitiveness, knowing that either choice weakens their position. Winners also think in terms of strategic sequences. They don't just plan individual moves, they plan entire sequences of moves that build on each other. Each action is designed not just to achieve an immediate goal, but to set up future actions that become more powerful because of what came before. This is how winners create unstoppable momentum while their competition is still reacting to individual events. One of the most powerful strategic concepts is controlling the pace of competition. Most people let their competition determine how fast things move. Winners control the tempo. When they want to exhaust their competition, they accelerate the pace, forcing rapid decisions and quick responses. When they want to consolidate their advantages, they slow things down, preventing their competition from making desperate moves that might succeed. Strategic thinking also involves understanding and exploiting your competition's dependencies. Every business, every person, and every organization depends on certain resources, relationships, or systems to function. Winners identify these dependencies and then systematically work to control or eliminate them. They don't attack their competition directly, they attack the things their competition depends on. Winners also use what I call strategic misdirection. They make their competition focus on the wrong things, while they quietly build insurmountable advantages in areas their competition is ignoring. They might engage in visible competition in one area while secretly dominating the supply chain, customer relationships, or technological infrastructure that will determine long-term success. Another crucial element of strategic thinking is scenario planning. Winners don't just plan for success, they plan for every possible scenario, including their competition's best possible responses. They develop contingency plans for different competitive reactions, and they're prepared to adapt their strategy based on how the situation evolves. This level of preparation gives them a massive advantage over competitors who are improvising their responses. Winners also understand the concept of strategic patience. They're willing to accept short-term losses or missed opportunities if it serves their long-term domination strategy. They might let their competition win small battles if it sets them up to win the entire war. This requires incredible discipline because it means resisting immediate gratification in favor of ultimate victory. The most sophisticated strategic thinkers also practice what I call competitive Aikido. Instead of opposing their competition's strength directly, they redirect that strength in ways that serve their own strategic goals. They make their competition's advantages become disadvantages, and their competition's aggressive moves become self-defeating. Strategic thinking also involves understanding the psychology of your competition's decision-makers. Winners study their competitors' leadership teams to understand their biases, fears, and decision-making patterns. They then craft strategies that exploit these psychological weaknesses. They know which competitors will respond aggressively, which ones will retreat, and which ones will try to find compromise solutions. Winners also think strategically about timing. They understand that the same move can be brilliant or disastrous depending on when it's executed. They study market cycles, industry trends, and competitive dynamics to identify the perfect moments to launch attacks, consolidate gains, or make strategic pivots. Perhaps most importantly, strategic thinkers always maintain multiple options. They never put themselves in positions where they have only one path to victory. They create backup plans for their backup plans, and they always maintain the flexibility to change strategies if circumstances change. This option value gives them enormous advantages over competitors who have committed to single approaches. The goal of strategic thinking isn't just to outcompete your rivals, it's to make competition irrelevant. The ultimate strategic victory is creating a situation where you've changed the rules of the game so fundamentally that your former competitors are no longer even playing the same game. You want to transcend competition entirely by creating new categories, new markets, or new value propositions that make traditional competitive dynamics obsolete. Chapter 6. The Art of Psychological Warfare in Competition. Psychological warfare isn't about being mean or cruel. It's about understanding that every competitive situation has a mental component that's often more important than the practical elements. While your competition is focused on products, services, and features, you're going to be focused on their minds. You're going to get inside their heads and make them defeat themselves. The first weapon in psychological warfare is creating doubt in your competition's minds about their own capabilities. You do this not through direct attacks, but through demonstrations of overwhelming competence. When you consistently perform at levels that seem impossible to your competition, they start questioning whether they belong in the same arena as you. They begin to see you as operating in a different league entirely. One of the most effective techniques is what I call the competence gap demonstration. This is where you casually accomplish things that your competition struggles with. You make difficult tasks look effortless while they're visibly struggling with basic execution. This creates a psychological impression of natural superiority that's incredibly damaging to their confidence and motivation. Another powerful psychological weapon is strategic silence. While your competition is talking, explaining, and justifying their actions, you remain mysteriously quiet about your methods and strategies. This creates an aura of hidden knowledge and secret advantages. Your competition starts imagining that you know something they don't, which makes them paranoid and causes them to second-guess their own strategies. Winners also use what I call tactical unpredictability to keep their competition off balance. They establish patterns and then break them at crucial moments. They appear to be following conventional strategies and then make moves that completely change the game. This constant uncertainty keeps their competition in a reactive state instead of allowing them to develop proactive strategies. The psychological principle of social proof is another devastating weapon. When you control how others perceive the competitive situation, you can make your dominance appear inevitable. Industry experts, media figures, and influential customers start treating you as the obvious leader. This creates a bandwagon effect, where your competition's own supporters start jumping to your side. Winners also understand the power of creating multiple dilemmas simultaneously. Instead of giving their competition one problem to solve, they present them with several interconnected challenges. Each potential solution creates new problems. This overwhelms their decision-making capacity and forces them into paralysis or desperate random actions that usually backfire. Time pressure is another psychological weapon that winners use masterfully. They force their competition to make critical decisions under artificial deadlines. They accelerate competitive cycles beyond their competitors' comfort zones. They create situations where delay means certain defeat, but hasty action usually leads to strategic mistakes. The most sophisticated practitioners of psychological warfare use what I call emotional manipulation tactics. They study their competition's leadership to understand their fears, insecurities, and emotional triggers. They then craft competitive moves designed to activate these psychological weaknesses. They make their competitors angry when they need to be calm, desperate when they need to be patient, and overconfident when they need to be cautious. Winners also practice strategic intimidation. This isn't about being aggressive or threatening, it's about demonstrating capabilities that make your competition realize the futility of opposing you. You show them glimpses of resources, strategies, or connections that make it clear that fighting you will be expensive, painful, and ultimately unsuccessful. Another psychological technique is controlling the narrative around failure and success. When your competition makes mistakes, you ensure those mistakes are highly visible and seem to reflect fundamental incompetence. When you make mistakes, you frame them as strategic experiments or calculated risks that provided valuable learning. This asymmetric interpretation of events gradually shifts perception in your favor. Winners also use what psychologists call gaslighting in competitive contexts. They make their competition question their own perceptions and judgments. They create situations where their competitors' natural responses seem irrational or inappropriate. Over time, this erodes their competition's confidence in their own decision-making abilities. The principle of learned helplessness is particularly powerful in long-term competitive situations. By consistently outmaneuvering your competition, you condition them to expect defeat. Eventually, they stop trying innovative strategies and fall into predictable defensive patterns. They become so focused on preventing losses that they stop pursuing victories. Winners also understand how to exploit their competition's cognitive biases. They know which competitors suffer from overconfidence bias, and they create situations that encourage overextension. They identify competitors with loss aversion and force them into situations where they have to risk current advantages for future gains. They recognize confirmation bias and feed their competitors information that supports wrong conclusions. Perhaps the most devastating psychological weapon is making your competition complicit in their own destruction. You create situations where their natural competitive instincts lead them to make decisions that serve your strategic goals. You make them think they're attacking you when they're actually strengthening your position. You turn their aggression into a tool for your own advancement. The ultimate goal of psychological warfare isn't just to win current competitions. It's to establish such complete mental dominance that future competitions become unnecessary. You want your reputation for psychological superiority to precede you. You want potential competitors to defeat themselves mentally before they ever engage with you practically. This level of psychological sophistication requires deep study of human nature, competitive dynamics, and individual personality types. You need to become a student of psychology, not for therapeutic purposes, but for competitive advantage. You need to understand what motivates people, what frightens them, and what causes them to make strategic mistakes. Chapter 7. Information Warfare. Controlling what your competition knows. In the modern competitive landscape, information is more valuable than money. The difference between winning and losing often comes down to who has better information and who can control their competition's access to crucial knowledge. While your competition is focused on gathering public information, you need to be focused on controlling the information environment entirely. The first principle of information warfare is asymmetric intelligence. You want to know everything about your competition while revealing nothing significant about yourself. This means investing heavily in competitive intelligence while simultaneously protecting your own strategic information. You need to become a black hole of information absorption while appearing completely transparent and open. Winners establish multiple information gathering systems that operate at different levels. They have obvious competitive research that anyone would expect. They have informal networks of relationships that provide insider perspectives. They have technical surveillance capabilities that track their competition's digital footprints. And they have human intelligence assets who can provide real-time information about their competitors' internal discussions and decision-making processes. The most valuable information isn't what your competition is doing now, it's what they're planning to do next. Winners focus on gathering intelligence about their competitors' future strategies, resource allocations, and strategic priorities. They want to know about new products before they're announced, new partnerships before they're signed, and new strategies before they're implemented. Controlling information flow also means becoming the primary source of industry information for media analysts and influencers. When journalists need expert commentary, they call you. When analysts need market insights, they rely on your data. When potential customers need education about your industry, they find your content. This positions you as the authority while making your competition appear to be following your lead. Winners also practice strategic information sharing. They selectively reveal information that serves their competitive interests while withholding information that could help their competition. They might share data that makes their competition look bad or information that encourages their competitors to make strategic mistakes. Every piece of information they release is calculated to advance their position. Disinformation is another tool in the information warfare arsenal. This doesn't mean lying about facts. It means creating false impressions about your capabilities, strategies, and intentions. You might let your competition believe you're focused on one market while you're actually preparing to dominate a different market. You might appear to be pursuing one strategy while actually implementing a completely different approach. Winners also understand the importance of information timing. The same piece of information can be helpful or harmful depending on when it's revealed. They hold on to strategic information until the moment when releasing it will have maximum impact on their competitive position. They might sit on damaging information about competitors until just before crucial negotiations or major announcements. Creating information dependencies is another sophisticated tactic. You become such a valuable source of market intelligence that your competition starts relying on information you provide. Once they're dependent on your information, you can subtly bias their understanding of market conditions, competitive threats, and strategic opportunities. You're not lying to them. You're just shaping their perception of reality. Winners also practice information denial strategies. They identify the types of information their competition needs to make good strategic decisions and then work to prevent them from accessing that information. This might involve exclusive relationships with key information sources, legal restrictions on information sharing, or simply making certain types of information too expensive for competitors to afford. The most advanced information warfare involves creating false patterns in the information environment. You establish consistent patterns of behavior and information sharing, and then suddenly break those patterns when it serves your strategic interests. Your competition becomes conditioned to expect certain types of information or behavior from you, and when you deviate from those patterns at crucial moments, it catches them completely off guard. Counterintelligence is equally important as intelligence gathering. You need to assume that your competitors are trying to gather information about you, and you need to protect your most valuable strategic secrets while potentially feeding them false information. This means compartmentalizing sensitive information, limiting access to critical data, and potentially running disinformation campaigns to mislead competitive intelligence efforts. Winners also understand how to weaponize public information. They become experts at analyzing publicly available data to extract insights that their competition misses. They use financial filings, patent applications, job postings, and other public sources to build detailed pictures of their competitors' strategies and capabilities. They see patterns in public information that reveal private strategic intentions. Social media and digital footprints provide unprecedented opportunities for information gathering. Winners monitor their competitors, employees, customers, and partners to understand internal dynamics, market perceptions, and strategic priorities. They use advanced analytics to track sentiment patterns, communication networks, and behavioral changes that indicate strategic shifts. Perhaps most importantly, winners understand that information warfare is about shaping reality, not just gathering facts. The goal isn't just to know what's happening, it's to influence what happens next. By controlling information flow, you can influence decision-making, alter market perceptions, and create competitive advantages that compound over time. The ultimate objective of information warfare is to create such superior situational awareness that you can predict and counter your competition's moves before they even make them. You want to reach a point where you understand your competitors' businesses better than they do, and where you can anticipate their strategies more accurately than they can plan them. Chapter 8. Economic Warfare. Destroying Competition through Resource Control. Money talks, but resource control screams. The most decisive competitive victories aren't won through better products or superior marketing. They're won by systematically strangling your competition's access to the resources they need to survive and grow. While they're focused on optimizing their operations, you're going to be focused on controlling the economic environment they operate in. The foundation of economic warfare is understanding resource dependencies. Every business, every organization, and every competitor depends on specific resources to function. These might be raw materials, talented employees, distribution channels, sources of capital, or customer segments. Winners map out these dependencies and then systematically work to control or eliminate access to the most critical resources. Capital starvation is one of the most effective economic warfare tactics. This doesn't mean you need to have more money than your competition. It means you need to make it impossible or extremely expensive for them to access the capital they need. You do this by building relationships with key investors, demonstrating superior returns, and creating competitive dynamics that make investing in your competitors appear risky or unprofitable. Winners also practice talent warfare. They identify the key people who make their competitors successful and then systematically recruit them away. This isn't just about hiring good employees, it's about creating talent shortages that cripple your competition's ability to execute their strategies. When your competitors lose their best people to you, they lose institutional knowledge, relationships, and competitive capabilities. Supply chain warfare is another devastating economic weapon. Winners identify critical suppliers that their competitors depend on and then either secure exclusive relationships with those suppliers or drive up costs through increased demand. They might purchase enough capacity to create shortages for competitors or negotiate terms that give them significant cost advantages. Distribution channel control is equally powerful. If you can control how products reach customers, you can effectively prevent your competition from accessing markets even if they have superior products. Winners invest heavily in securing exclusive or preferential access to the most valuable distribution channels while simultaneously working to limit their competitors' distribution options. Customer capture is perhaps the most direct form of economic warfare. Instead of competing for customers, you work to make customers so dependent on your solutions that switching to competitors becomes practically impossible. This involves creating switching costs, lock-in effects, and integrated solutions that make alternative providers appear inadequate or risky. Winners also use what I call economic pressure campaigns. They identify their competitors' most vulnerable financial positions and then apply coordinated pressure to those weak points. This might involve price wars in critical market segments, timing product launches to disrupt competitors' revenue cycles, or creating conditions that force competitors to spend resources defending instead of investing in growth. Intellectual property warfare is increasingly important in knowledge-based industries. Winners build patent portfolios not just to protect their own innovations, but to create legal obstacles for their competitors. They file strategic patents that control key technologies or processes that competitors need. They use licensing terms and legal challenges to extract resources from competitors or limit their strategic options. Market timing manipulation is another sophisticated economic warfare tactic. Winners work to accelerate or delay market developments in ways that favor their competitive position. They might push standards adoption ahead of schedule when they have advantages, or slow down market evolution when they need more time to develop competitive responses. The most advanced practitioners of economic warfare create what I call resource deserts around their competitors. They systematically eliminate access to multiple critical resources simultaneously. While competitors are dealing with talent shortages, winners create capital constraints. While competitors are solving capital problems, winners eliminate their supplier relationships. This multi-front resource pressure overwhelms competitors' ability to respond effectively. Winners also understand how to use regulatory and legal systems as economic weapons. They support regulations that increase costs for competitors while providing exemptions or advantages for themselves. They use legal challenges to force competitors to spend resources on defense instead of competitive improvement. They lobby for industry standards that favor their technologies or business models. Economic warfare also involves understanding and exploiting your competitors' cost structures. Winners analyze their competitors' economics to identify the price points at which competitors become unprofitable. They then use their own cost advantages to force pricing below competitors' break-even points while maintaining their own profitability. Strategic partnerships can be used as economic weapons when structured properly. Winners create partnership networks that provide them with exclusive access to resources while simultaneously denying those resources to competitors. They might form alliances with key suppliers, technology providers, or distribution partners that effectively shut competitors out of critical relationships. Perhaps the most devastating form of economic warfare is creating economic dependencies that benefit you while harming competitors. You structure deals, partnerships, and market relationships so that your success automatically creates problems for your competition. When you win, your competitors don't just lose opportunities, they actually become worse off in absolute terms. The ultimate goal of economic warfare is to create such overwhelming resource advantages that competition becomes economically irrational. You want to reach a point where potential competitors look at the resource requirements for competing with you and decide that their capital would be better invested elsewhere. You want to make competition with you not just difficult, but financially suicidal. Chapter 9. The Network Effect. Building alliances that destroy competition. Most people think of competition as individual combat, but winners understand that the most decisive victories come from building networks of relationships that multiply their power while isolating their competition. This isn't about making friends, it's about creating strategic alliances that serve your competitive interests while systematically cutting your competitors off from the relationships they need to succeed. The foundation of network warfare is understanding that every relationship is either helping you win or helping your competition win. There are no neutral relationships in competitive environments. Winners evaluate every potential relationship through a simple filter. Does this person or organization make me more likely to dominate my market? And does working with me make it less likely that they'll help my competitors? Strategic alliance building starts with mapping the entire ecosystem of relationships that influence your competitive environment. This includes obvious players like suppliers and customers, but also extends to regulators, media figures, industry influencers, investors, advisors, and even the personal networks of key decision-makers. Winners create comprehensive relationship maps that show how influence and resources flow through their competitive environment. The most powerful alliances are exclusive relationships that prevent your partners from working with your competitors. Winners don't just seek partnerships, they seek partnerships that come with non-compete clauses, exclusivity agreements, or other arrangements that force their partners to choose sides. When someone agrees to work with you, they're simultaneously agreeing not to help your competition. Winners also understand the concept of relationship arbitrage. They identify valuable relationships that their competitors haven't recognized or haven't prioritized. They might build alliances with emerging players who will become important in the future, or they might develop relationships with influential people who aren't obviously connected to their industry, but who have the power to shape market conditions. Network effects become exponentially powerful when your alliances start creating value for each other independently of your direct involvement. Winners structure their alliance networks so that their partners benefit from working with other partners in the network. This creates self-reinforcing relationships that become stronger over time, while making it increasingly difficult for competitors to break into the network. Strategic exclusion is as important as strategic inclusion. Winners identify the relationships that would be most valuable to their competitors, and then work to prevent those relationships from forming. They might outbid competitors for exclusive partnerships, they might create conflicts between potential partners, or they might simply monopolize the time and attention of key relationship targets. Winners also practice what I call relationship warfare. They study their competitors' key relationships and then systematically work to weaken or eliminate those relationships. This might involve offering better terms to their competitors' key partners, creating conflicts between their competitors and their allies, or simply making it more attractive for their competitors' partners to switch sides. The most sophisticated network builders create what I call relationship lock-in effects. Once someone enters their alliance network, it becomes increasingly costly and difficult to leave. Winners structure their partnerships so that their allies become dependent on the network for multiple types of value. Leaving the network would mean losing access to customers, suppliers, expertise, or other critical resources. Timing is crucial in network warfare. Winners understand when to build relationships, when to activate them, and when to dissolve them. They build relationships before they need them so that they're available when competitive situations arise. They activate multiple relationships simultaneously to create overwhelming competitive pressure. And they dissolve relationships when they're no longer strategically valuable or when maintaining them starts helping competitors. Winners also understand how to use their networks for intelligence gathering and information warfare. Their alliance partners become sources of competitive intelligence and channels for spreading strategic information or disinformation. A well-connected winner can gather information about competitors' strategies and influence market perceptions through their network relationships. Relationship investments should be evaluated like any other strategic investment. Winners calculate the return on relationship investment, and they prioritize relationships that provide the highest strategic value. They might invest heavily in relationships with industry gatekeepers or influential decision-makers while spending minimal time on relationships that don't provide competitive advantages. Cross-industry networking is particularly powerful because it provides access to resources and capabilities that competitors in your industry can't match. Winners build relationships with people and organizations in adjacent industries that can provide unique advantages. They might partner with technology companies for innovation capabilities or with financial institutions for capital access. The most advanced network warriors create what I call ecosystem control. They build alliance networks that are so comprehensive and exclusive that competitors can't access the resources they need to compete effectively. They don't just have better relationships, they control the relationship environment so completely that competition becomes practically impossible. Strategic relationship building also involves understanding and exploiting the relationship needs of key players in your competitive environment. Winners study what other people and organizations need from relationships and then position themselves as the best source of those benefits. They make themselves indispensable to their alliance partners while making their competitors appear unreliable or unhelpful. Perhaps most importantly, winners understand that network effects compound over time. Early relationship investments create opportunities for additional relationships, which create more opportunities in a virtuous cycle. The earlier you start building strategic networks, the more dramatic your eventual competitive advantages become. The ultimate goal of network warfare is to create such comprehensive relationship advantages that your competitors are completely isolated from the resources, relationships, and opportunities they need to compete with you. You want to reach a point where everyone who could help your competitors is already committed to helping you instead. Chapter 10. Timing and Momentum. Striking when your competition is weakest. Timing isn't everything in competition, it's the only thing that matters. The same competitive move can be brilliant or disastrous, depending on when it's executed. Winners don't just develop superior strategies, they develop superior timing. They understand when to attack, when to defend, when to advance, and when to retreat. Most importantly, they understand how to identify and exploit moments of maximum competitive vulnerability. The foundation of strategic timing is recognizing that every competitor, every market, and every competitive situation has natural cycles of strength and weakness. Winners study these cycles obsessively. They map out their competitors' busy seasons, cash flow cycles, product development timelines, hiring patterns, and leadership transitions. They identify the moments when their competitors are distracted, overextended, or otherwise vulnerable to strategic attacks. Momentum is the force multiplier that turns good timing into decisive victories. Winners understand that momentum is a psychological phenomenon as much as a practical one. When you're perceived to be winning, people and resources naturally flow toward you. when you're perceived to be losing, those same people and resources flow away from you. The key is to create and maintain the perception of inevitable success while systematically undermining your competitors' momentum. One of the most powerful timing strategies is attacking during your competitors' transition periods. When competitors are changing leadership, launching new products, entering new markets, or restructuring their organizations, they're temporarily weakened and distracted. Winners exploit these transition windows by accelerating their own competitive moves while their opponents are focused on internal changes. Cash flow timing is particularly important in competitive warfare. Most businesses have predictable cash flow cycles with periods of strength and vulnerability. Winners time their most aggressive competitive moves to coincide with their competitors' cash flow weak points. They force their competitors to make expensive defensive moves when they're least able to afford them. Winners also understand seasonal and cyclical timing patterns in their industries. They know when their competitors are most focused on operations versus strategy, when decision-makers are available versus distracted, and when market conditions favor aggressive moves versus defensive positioning. They synchronize their competitive strategies with these natural rhythms to maximize impact. Market timing involves understanding broader economic and industry cycles that affect competitive dynamics. Winners anticipate market shifts before their competitors do, and they position themselves to benefit from changes while their competitors are still adapting to new conditions. They might prepare for economic downturns that will hurt competitors or invest ahead of growth cycles that will create new opportunities. The psychology of timing is equally important as the practical aspect. Winners understand that the same competitive move will be interpreted differently depending on market conditions, competitive context, and their own momentum status. They time their moves to maximize positive interpretation while minimizing the risk of negative backlash. Cumulative timing involves coordinating multiple competitive moves to create overwhelming pressure during specific time windows. Instead of spreading attacks over long periods, winners concentrate their competitive efforts into focused campaigns that overwhelm their opponent's ability to respond effectively. They create artificial crises that force their competitors into reactive defensive positions. Winners also practice defensive timing, recognizing when they need to protect their positions rather than advance them. They understand their own vulnerable periods, and they develop strategies for minimizing exposure during these times. They might delay major initiatives during their own transition periods or build defensive barriers before anticipated competitive attacks. Speed timing is about controlling the pace of competitive action. Winners know when to accelerate competitive cycles to their advantage and when to slow things down to maintain their positioning. They might force rapid decision-making when they have better information or slow down competitive processes when they need more time to prepare responses. The most sophisticated timing strategists create what I call timing traps. They manipulate competitive conditions to force their opponents to make moves at exactly the wrong moments. They might create artificial urgency that causes competitors to act prematurely, or they might delay critical information until their competitors have already committed to inferior strategies. Opportunity window recognition is crucial for timing success. Winners identify brief periods when competitive conditions align in their favor, and they're prepared to move decisively when these windows open. They maintain strategic flexibility so they can rapidly exploit timing opportunities that might only be available for short periods. Winners also understand momentum preservation techniques. Once they've established favorable momentum, they know how to maintain and accelerate it. They sequence their competitive moves to build on previous successes. They communicate their victories strategically to reinforce perceptions of dominance. They reinvest their gains immediately to maintain competitive pressure. Perhaps most importantly, Winners understand that timing advantages compound over time. Early timing successes create information advantages, relationship benefits, and resource advantages that make future timing decisions more effective. The more precisely you can time your competitive moves, the more dramatic your eventual dominance becomes. The ultimate goal of timing mastery is to reach a point where you're always moving at the optimal moment, while your competitors are always moving at the worst possible time. You want to create such superior timing capabilities that your competitive moves succeed, not just because they're well designed, but because they're perfectly timed to exploit your opponent's maximum vulnerability. Chapter 11. The Mental Models of Apex Predators. The difference between ordinary winners and apex predators isn't just skill or resources, it's how they think about reality itself. Apex predators operate from completely different mental models than everyone else. While ordinary people see the world as complex and unpredictable, apex predators see it as a system of patterns that can be understood, exploited, and controlled. They don't just react to circumstances, they reshape circumstances to serve their purposes. The first mental model of apex predators is systems thinking. They don't see individual events or isolated competitions. They see interconnected systems where every action creates multiple consequences. When an apex predator makes a competitive move, they're not just thinking about the immediate impact. They're thinking about how that move will affect supplier, relationships, customer perceptions, regulatory responses, competitive reactions, and market dynamics 6 moves into the future. Systems thinking means understanding that everything is connected to everything else. When you attack a competitor in one market, you're also affecting their performance in other markets, their ability to attract talent, their relationships with partners, and their access to capital. Apex predators map out these system connections, and they design their competitive strategies to create cascading effects that multiply their impact far beyond the initial action. The second mental model is probabilistic thinking. Apex predators don't think in terms of certainties, they think in terms of probabilities and expected outcomes. They understand that every competitive situation involves uncertainty, but they excel at calculating odds and making decisions that maximize their expected returns while minimizing their risks. They're comfortable operating in environments where others are paralyzed by uncertainty. Probabilistic thinking also means portfolio approaches to competition. Instead of betting everything on single strategies, apex predators maintain multiple competitive approaches simultaneously. They might pursue 3 different market entry strategies, knowing that only one needs to succeed to achieve their goals. They diversify their competitive risks while concentrating their competitive advantages. The third mental model is optionality thinking. Apex predators always maintain multiple options, and they structure their competitive strategies to create additional options over time. They understand that flexibility is more valuable than efficiency in competitive environments. They're willing to pay the cost of maintaining options because options provide asymmetric upside potential with limited downside risk. Optionality thinking means making investments that might not pay off immediately but that create future opportunities for competitive advantage. An apex predator might invest in relationship building, technology development, or market positioning that seems unnecessary today, but that provides strategic options for future competitive scenarios. They create option value systematically and strategically. The fourth mental model is leverage thinking. Apex predators are obsessed with finding ways to multiply their impact without multiplying their effort. They look for leverage points where small actions create disproportionate results. They use other people's money, other people's time, other people's relationships, and other people's capabilities to achieve their competitive objectives. Leverage thinking extends beyond financial leverage to include psychological leverage, social leverage, technological leverage, and strategic leverage. An apex predator might use their reputation to create psychological leverage that makes competitors hesitate. They might use their network relationships to create social leverage that influences market perceptions. They find ways to make their advantages compound automatically. The fifth mental model is asymmetric thinking. Apex predators look for situations where they can win big while risking small, or where they can create competitive advantages that are difficult or impossible for others to replicate. They're not interested in fair fights, they're interested in unfair advantages that guarantee their success while making their competitors' success unlikely or impossible. Asymmetric thinking means finding competitive strategies that work better for you than they would for your competitors. This might involve leveraging unique capabilities, exploiting structural advantages, or creating competitive dynamics that favor your strengths while exposing your competitors' weaknesses. Apex predators design asymmetric competitions where they can't lose. The sixth mental model is second-order thinking. While most people think about the immediate consequences of their actions, apex predators think about the consequences of the consequences. They ask not just what will happen if I do this, but what will happen after that happens, and what will happen after that happens. They trace out the full chain of consequences from their competitive moves. Second-order thinking prevents apex predators from falling into short-term thinking traps. They might avoid competitive moves that would provide immediate advantages, but that would create long-term disadvantages. They might accept short-term costs to position themselves for long-term dominance. They play longer games than their competitors because they can see further into the future. The seventh mental model is inversion thinking. Apex predators don't just think about how to succeed. They think about how to avoid failure. They systematically identify everything that could go wrong with their strategies, and they build safeguards against those failure modes. They ask not just how can I win, but how can I make sure I don't lose? Inversion thinking also means studying failure patterns in their industries and among their competitors. They learn from other people's mistakes, so they don't have to make those mistakes themselves. They identify the common reasons why competitive strategies fail, and they design their approaches to avoid those pitfalls. The eighth mental model is contrarian thinking. Apex predators systematically question conventional wisdom and popular assumptions. They look for opportunities that others are missing because everyone believes something that isn't true. They find competitive advantages by doing the opposite of what everyone else is doing when the conventional approach is flawed. Contrarian thinking requires intellectual independence and the courage to act on beliefs that others consider wrong or crazy. Apex predators are willing to be misunderstood in the short term if they believe their contrarian approach will be vindicated by long-term results. They profit from other people's conventional thinking mistakes. The ninth mental model is game theory thinking. Apex predators understand that competitive situations are games with rules, strategies, and optimal moves. They study their competitors' incentives, constraints, and likely responses. They design their strategies not just to achieve their own objectives, but to make their competitors' optimal responses serve their purposes. Game theory thinking means always considering how your moves will change your competitors' incentives and likely actions. You might make a move that seems suboptimal in isolation, but that forces your competitors into responses that ultimately benefit you. You manipulate the game structure to make your success and your competitors' failure equally inevitable. The 10th mental model is exponential thinking. Apex predators understand that small advantages can compound into massive dominance over time. They're willing to invest in building slight edges today because they understand how those edges will multiply in the future. They think exponentially about growth potential while thinking conservatively about risk management. Exponential thinking also applies to competitive destruction. Small damages to competitors' capabilities can compound into total collapse over time. Apex predators inflict systematic minor damages that accumulate into major competitive disadvantages. They understand that destroying competition doesn't require single decisive blows, it requires consistent pressure that compounds over time. These mental models work together synergistically. Systems thinking identifies leverage points. Probabilistic thinking evaluates option values. Asymmetric thinking finds unfair advantages. Second-order thinking anticipates consequences. Inversion thinking prevents failures. Contrarian thinking finds overlooked opportunities. Game theory thinking optimizes strategic interactions. Exponential thinking maximizes compound effects. The ultimate goal of developing these mental models is to think about competition at a fundamentally different level than your opponents. While they're playing checkers, you're playing three-dimensional chess. While they're focused on today's battles, you're designing tomorrow's wars. While they're reacting to circumstances, you're creating the circumstances they react to. Chapter 12. Building your competitive intelligence network. Intelligence is the ultimate competitive weapon, and building a world-class intelligence network is what separates amateur competitors from professional dominators. Most people gather information casually and randomly, hoping to stumble across useful competitive insights. Professional winners build systematic intelligence-gathering operations that provide them with comprehensive, real-time awareness of everything happening in their competitive environment. The foundation of competitive intelligence is understanding that information flows through human networks. Documents and databases contain historical information, but the most valuable intelligence comes from people who have access to current plans, future strategies, and internal discussions. Building an intelligence network means systematically cultivating relationships with people who have access to the information you need to dominate your competition. The first layer of your intelligence network consists of direct sources within your competitors' organizations. These are employees, contractors, consultants, or other insiders who have access to strategic information about your competitors' plans, capabilities, and vulnerabilities. Developing these sources requires patience, subtlety, and value exchange. You need to provide these sources with something they value in exchange for the intelligence they provide. Direct source development is an art that requires deep understanding of human motivation and psychology. Different people are motivated by different things. Some sources are motivated by money, others by recognition, others by revenge against their employers, others by intellectual stimulation. Professional intelligence operators study their potential sources to understand what motivates them, and then structure relationships that satisfy those motivations while providing valuable intelligence. The most valuable direct sources are people in strategic positions who have access to high-level planning and decision-making. These might be executive assistants who see confidential documents, strategy consultants who attend planning meetings, board members who participate in strategic discussions, or senior managers who are involved in competitive planning. Developing relationships with these high-value sources requires significant investment but provides extraordinary returns. The second layer of your intelligence network consists of indirect sources who don't work for your competitors but who have regular contact with your competitors' organizations. These include suppliers, customers, partners, consultants, industry analysts, journalists, and other third parties who interact with your competitors in ways that give them insights into your competitors' strategies and performance. Indirect sources are often more accessible than direct sources because they don't have the same loyalty constraints or confidentiality concerns. A supplier might be willing to discuss your competitors' ordering patterns and payment behavior. A customer might share their impressions of your competitors' new product development efforts. An industry analyst might provide insights into your competitors' strategic priorities based on their research interviews. Building relationships with indirect sources requires understanding their business needs and finding ways to provide value to them. You might become a valuable customer for suppliers who also work with your competitors. You might provide market insights to analysts who cover your industry. You might offer expertise or connections to consultants who work with multiple companies in your space. The third layer of your intelligence network consists of public source monitoring and analysis. This includes systematic tracking of your competitors' public communications, financial filings, patent applications, job postings, social media activity, and media coverage. While this information is publicly available, most organizations don't analyze it systematically or extract the strategic insights that are hidden in plain sight. Advanced public source intelligence involves using sophisticated analytical tools to identify patterns and trends that reveal strategic information. You might analyze your competitors' hiring patterns to understand their strategic priorities. You might track their patent filings to understand their technology development efforts. You might monitor their executive speaking engagements and interviews to understand their strategic thinking. Social media intelligence has become increasingly valuable as executives and employees share information about their organization's activities and priorities. Professional intelligence operators monitor key personnel across multiple social media platforms, looking for information about new products, strategic partnerships, organizational changes, and competitive strategies. They use advanced social media monitoring tools to track conversations and sentiment around their competitors. Digital footprint analysis involves tracking your competitors' online activities to understand their marketing strategies, customer acquisition efforts, technology infrastructure, and operational capabilities. This might include analyzing their website changes, search engine optimization strategies, online advertising campaigns, and digital marketing metrics. Professional competitors use competitive intelligence tools to monitor their competitors' digital activities continuously. Financial intelligence involves deep analysis of your competitors' financial statements, cash flow patterns, funding sources, and capital allocation decisions. Professional intelligence operators don't just look at the headline financial numbers, they analyze the details to understand their competitors' strategic priorities, resource constraints, and growth limitations. They might identify cash flow vulnerabilities that could be exploited through competitive pricing strategies. The most sophisticated intelligence networks include human intelligence operations that go beyond casual relationship building to include systematic intelligence gathering protocols. This might involve training your sales team to gather competitive intelligence during customer interactions. It might include debriefing employees who attend industry conferences or trade shows. It might include systematic intelligence, sharing with partners and allies. Counterintelligence is equally important as intelligence gathering. You need to assume that your competitors are trying to gather intelligence about your organization, and you need to protect your most valuable strategic information while potentially feeding false information to your competitors' intelligence efforts. This requires understanding how your competitors might be trying to gather intelligence about you and developing appropriate security measures. Intelligence analysis and synthesis is where raw information becomes actionable competitive advantage. Professional intelligence operators don't just gather information, they analyze it to identify patterns, trends, and strategic insights that inform competitive strategy. They look for early warning signs of competitive threats and opportunities. They identify their competitors' strategic vulnerabilities and resource constraints. The most advanced intelligence networks operate in real time, providing continuous awareness of competitive developments as they happen. This requires automated monitoring systems, human intelligence networks, and analytical capabilities that can quickly assess the strategic implications of new information. Real-time competitive intelligence allows you to respond to competitive threats and opportunities immediately, instead of discovering them weeks or months after they occur. Intelligence sharing and coordination with allies and partners can multiply your intelligence capabilities dramatically. If you have strategic partners who are also gathering competitive intelligence, you can share information and insights to create comprehensive competitive awareness that none of you could achieve individually. This requires trust, careful coordination, and mutual benefit, but can provide extraordinary competitive advantages. The ultimate goal of building a competitive intelligence network is to achieve information superiority over your competitors. You want to know more about their strategies, capabilities, and vulnerabilities than they know about yours. You want to anticipate their moves before they make them and understand their thinking better than they understand yours. Information superiority enables strategic superiority, which leads to competitive dominance. Chapter 13. Advanced Manipulation Tactics for Competitive Advantage. Manipulation isn't a dirty word in competitive environments. It's a professional skill. Every successful negotiation, every effective sales process, and every winning competitive strategy involves some form of influence and persuasion that could be called manipulation. The difference between ethical manipulation and unethical manipulation isn't whether you're influencing people, it's whether you're creating mutual value while advancing your competitive position. The foundation of ethical manipulation is understanding that all human interactions involve attempts to influence behavior. When you present information in a compelling way, you're manipulating perception. When you structure deals to be attractive, you're manipulating decision-making. When you build relationships to gain access and influence, you're manipulating social dynamics. Professional competitors master these influence skills instead of pretending they don't exist. The first category of manipulation tactics involves cognitive bias exploitation. Every human being has predictable cognitive biases that affect their decision-making. Professional competitors study these biases and structure their competitive strategies to exploit them systematically. This isn't about tricking people, it's about presenting information and opportunities in ways that align with natural human psychology. Anchoring bias exploitation involves establishing reference points that influence how people evaluate alternatives. If you want someone to accept a particular deal, you first present a much more expensive alternative that makes your preferred option seem reasonable by comparison. If you want to appear competent, you establish comparison points that highlight your strengths while minimizing your competitors' advantages. Confirmation bias exploitation involves providing information that supports conclusions you want people to reach while making it easy for them to ignore contradictory information. You don't lie about facts, but you curate the information environment to guide people toward the conclusions that serve your competitive interests. You make your preferred narrative the most accessible and convincing story. Loss aversion exploitation involves framing competitive situations in terms of what people might lose rather than what they might gain. People are psychologically motivated more by avoiding losses than by achieving gains. Professional manipulators frame their propositions in terms of protecting against losses or missing opportunities rather than simply achieving positive outcomes. Social proof manipulation involves creating the impression that important people or successful organizations have already chosen to work with you. People are strongly influenced by what they perceive others to be doing, especially people they respect or aspire to emulate. Professional competitors cultivate and publicize relationships with prestigious clients, partners, and supporters to create bandwagon effects. Authority manipulation involves establishing yourself as an expert or leader in your field so that people are predisposed to accept your recommendations and follow your guidance. This might involve publishing thought leadership content, speaking at industry conferences, or being quoted as an expert in media coverage. Authority status creates automatic influence that serves competitive purposes. Reciprocity manipulation involves providing value to people before asking for anything in return, creating psychological pressure to reciprocate. This might involve providing free consulting, helpful introductions, valuable information, or other benefits that create obligation. People feel psychologically compelled to return favors, which creates influence opportunities. Scarcity manipulation involves creating or highlighting limited availability of opportunities, resources, or access. People value things more highly when they believe they might lose the chance to obtain them. Professional competitors create artificial scarcity around their services, exclusive access to their expertise, or time-limited opportunities to work with them. Commitment and consistency manipulation involves getting people to make small commitments that lead to larger commitments over time. Once people commit to a position or relationship, they feel psychological pressure to remain consistent with that commitment. Professional manipulators structure engagement processes that involve escalating commitments that become difficult to reverse. The second category of manipulation tactics involves emotional manipulation. While cognitive biases affect thinking processes, emotions drive behavior and decision-making. Professional competitors understand how to influence emotional states in ways that support their competitive objectives while maintaining ethical boundaries. Fear manipulation involves highlighting risks, threats, or negative consequences that people want to avoid. This isn't about creating false fears, it's about making real risks more salient and connecting those risks to decisions you want people to make. You might highlight competitive threats that your services help address, or market risks that your solutions help mitigate. Greed manipulation involves highlighting opportunities for gain or advantage that appeal to people's self-interest. You structure your competitive propositions to emphasize the benefits and advantages that people will receive from working with you instead of your competitors. You make your offerings appear to provide exceptional value or unique opportunities. Pride manipulation involves appealing to people's self-image and desire to be seen as smart, successful, or sophisticated. You position your services or relationships as markers of status or intelligence. You make people feel that choosing you reflects well on their judgment and positions them favorably relative to their peers. Social belonging manipulation involves creating in-groups and out-groups, where working with you provides social connection and status, while working with competitors creates social isolation. You build communities around your brand or services that provide social benefits beyond the practical benefits of your offerings. The third category of manipulation tactics involves structural manipulation. This involves changing the context or environment in which decisions are made to favor outcomes that serve your competitive interests. Structural manipulation is often more powerful than direct persuasion because it influences behavior without people realizing they're being influenced. Choice architecture manipulation involves structuring the alternatives that people choose between to make your preferred option appear more attractive. This might involve controlling what alternatives are presented, how they're described, and what criteria are emphasized in the decision-making process. You make your option the obvious choice without eliminating alternatives entirely. Information sequencing manipulation involves controlling the order in which people receive information to influence their conclusions. The same facts can lead to different conclusions depending on the sequence in which they're presented. Professional manipulators structure information flow to guide people toward conclusions that serve their competitive purposes. Time pressure manipulation involves creating artificial urgency that forces people to make decisions before they've fully considered all alternatives. This might involve limited time offers, exclusive opportunities, or competitive situations that require rapid responses. Time pressure tends to favor the alternative that's most readily available or most convincingly presented. Context manipulation involves changing the environment in which decisions are made to influence psychological state and decision-making processes. This might involve meeting locations, physical environments, social settings, or other contextual factors that affect how people think and feel about their choices. The most sophisticated manipulation tactics combine multiple influence techniques simultaneously. Professional competitors might exploit cognitive biases while triggering emotional responses, while structuring choices to create the influence effects they want. They understand that influence is most powerful when it operates through multiple psychological channels simultaneously. The ultimate goal of manipulation tactics isn't to trick people into making decisions against their interests. It's to guide people toward decisions that serve both their interests and your competitive purposes. The most effective manipulation creates win-win outcomes, where people feel good about their decisions, while those decisions advance your competitive position. Ethical manipulation creates mutual value, while unethical manipulation extracts value at other people's expense. Chapter 14. Creating competitive moats that can't be crossed. Building sustainable competitive advantages isn't about winning today's battles, it's about making future battles unnecessary. The ultimate competitive victory is creating barriers around your position that are so formidable that potential competitors decide not to compete with you at all. These barriers, called competitive moats, make your dominance permanent instead of temporary, and they transform competition from an ongoing struggle into a historical curiosity. The concept of competitive moats comes from medieval warfare, where castles were protected by water-filled ditches that made attacks extremely difficult and expensive. In business, competitive moats are structural advantages that make it economically irrational for competitors to challenge your position. The deeper and wider your moats, the more secure your competitive dominance becomes. The first type of competitive moat is the cost advantage moat. This involves achieving cost structures that are so superior to your competitors that you can profitably serve markets at prices that would bankrupt your competition. Cost advantages can come from economies of scale, technological superiority, access to cheaper resources, more efficient processes, or structural advantages that your competitors can't replicate. Building cost advantage moats requires massive scale-efficient operations and continuous improvement processes that compound your advantages over time. You need to reach minimum efficient scale before your competitors do, and then maintain cost leadership through ongoing optimization. The goal is to reach a point where competing with you requires accepting permanently lower profit margins or losing money on every transaction. Cost advantages become moats when they're structural rather than temporary. If your cost advantage comes from a proprietary technology that competitors can license or reverse engineer, it's not a sustainable moat. But if your cost advantage comes from economies of scale that require massive capital investment to replicate, then you've created a genuine barrier to entry. The second type of competitive moat is the network effects moat. This involves creating value propositions that become more valuable as more people use them. Social media platforms become more valuable as more users join. Payment systems become more valuable as more merchants accept them. Communication tools become more valuable as more people adopt them. Network effects create winner-take-all dynamics, where the leading competitor becomes dramatically more valuable than alternatives. Once you achieve critical mass in a network effects business, your advantages compound automatically, as each new customer makes your service more valuable to all existing customers. This creates switching costs and customer lock-in that make competitive displacement extremely difficult. Building network effects moats requires reaching critical mass before competitors do, and then maintaining user growth and engagement. You need to create experiences that are significantly better when more people participate, and you need to defend against competitors who might try to fragment your network or build competing networks. The third type of competitive moat is the switching costs moat. This involves creating customer relationships where changing to a competitor would be expensive, difficult, or risky for your customers. Switching costs can be financial, involving cancellation fees or replacement costs. They can be operational, involving retraining employees or changing processes. They can be psychological, involving uncertainty about new alternatives. High switching costs make your customers sticky and reduce their price sensitivity. Even if competitors offer better features or lower prices, your customers might stay with you because the costs of switching outweigh the benefits. This gives you pricing power and protects your market share from competitive attacks. Building switching costs moats involves integrating deeply into your customers' operations, making yourself difficult to replace, and creating value that would be lost if customers switched. You might provide customized solutions that require significant setup costs. You might store customer data in proprietary formats. You might train your customers' employees on your systems and processes. The fourth type of competitive moat is the intangible assets moat. This involves owning intellectual property, brand recognition, regulatory advantages, or other intangible assets that competitors can't replicate or circumvent. Patents protect technological innovations. Trademarks protect brand identity. Regulatory approvals protect market access. Trade secrets protect proprietary knowledge. Intangible assets become moats when they provide exclusive access to market opportunities or customer value propositions. A pharmaceutical patent gives you exclusive rights to sell a particular drug. A strong brand gives you premium pricing power and customer preference. Regulatory approvals give you exclusive access to regulated markets. Building intangible assets moats requires long-term investment in innovation, brand, building regulatory relationships, and intellectual property development. You need to create proprietary value that competitors can't legally copy, and you need to defend your intellectual property rights aggressively when competitors try to infringe. The fifth type of competitive moat is the regulatory moat. This involves operating in industries where government regulations create barriers to entry or competitive advantages for established players. Banking, telecommunications, healthcare, and other heavily regulated industries often have regulatory moats that protect existing competitors from new entrants. Regulatory moats can come from licensing requirements that are expensive or difficult to obtain. They can come from compliance costs that favor large established players over small new entrants. They can come from regulatory relationships that give you preferential treatment or early access to regulatory changes. Building regulatory moats requires deep expertise in regulatory processes, strong relationships with regulatory agencies, and the resources to comply with complex regulatory requirements. You need to understand how regulations affect competitive dynamics, and you need to influence regulatory development in ways that strengthen your position relative to competitors. The sixth type of competitive moat is the geographic moat. This involves controlling access to physical locations, distribution channels, or geographic markets in ways that make competitive entry difficult or impossible. Retail locations with exclusive access to high-traffic areas create geographic moats. Distribution networks with exclusive relationships create geographic moats. Geographic moats are particularly powerful in businesses where physical presence or local relationships are important competitive factors. If you control the best retail locations in a market, competitors have to accept inferior locations. If you have exclusive relationships with local distributors, competitors have to build alternative distribution networks. Building geographic moats requires strategic real estate acquisition, exclusive partnership development, and local market dominance. You need to identify and control the geographic choke points that competitors would need to access to compete with you effectively. The most powerful competitive positions combine multiple types of moats simultaneously. Amazon has cost advantages from scale network effects, from marketplace participants, switching costs from Prime membership, intangible assets from brand recognition, and geographic advantages from distribution infrastructure. These multiple moats reinforce each other and make competitive displacement virtually impossible. Moat maintenance is as important as moat construction. Competitive advantages decay over time if they're not continuously reinforced and expanded. Technology changes, market conditions shift, and competitors develop new ways to attack your position. You need to invest continuously in maintaining and deepening your competitive moats. The ultimate goal of moat building is to reach what Warren Buffett calls an economic castle. This is a competitive position that's so well defended that you can raise prices, regularly generate exceptional returns, and operate with minimal competitive pressure. Economic castles provide sustainable wealth generation and strategic flexibility that temporary competitive advantages can't match. Chapter 15. Long-term domination. Maintaining your position at the top. Reaching the top of your competitive hierarchy is difficult, but staying there is even harder. Most people who achieve competitive dominance eventually lose it because they don't understand the psychology and strategy of long-term position maintenance. They think that winning once means they've won permanently, but competitive advantage is like muscle mass. If you don't continue developing it systematically, you lose it inevitably. The first principle of long-term domination is understanding that your competitive environment never stops evolving. New competitors enter markets. Existing competitors develop new capabilities. Customer preferences change. Technologies advance. Regulatory environments shift. Economic conditions fluctuate. If you're not continuously adapting and improving your competitive position, you're falling behind even if it doesn't feel that way. This means that maintaining dominance requires the same intensity and strategic sophistication that achieving dominance required. You can't relax your competitive efforts once you reach the top, because relaxation is the beginning of decline. The moment you start coasting on your previous success, competitors start gaining ground that they'll eventually use to displace you. The second principle is that different competitive strategies are required for maintaining position than for achieving position. When you're climbing toward dominance, you can focus single-mindedly on overtaking whoever is currently at the top. But when you're at the top, you have to defend against multiple potential challenges simultaneously while continuing to advance your own capabilities. Defensive strategy becomes crucial when you're at the top. You need to identify potential competitive threats before they become serious challenges. You need to monitor emerging competitors who might not be significant today, but who could become dangerous in the future. You need to track industry developments that might create new competitive dynamics or opportunities for disruption. The most successful long-term dominators Practice what I call preemptive competition. Instead of waiting for competitors to challenge their position, they proactively attack potential threats before those threats become dangerous. They might acquire promising startups that could become competitive threats. They might enter new markets before existing competitors expand into those markets. They might develop new capabilities before competitors force them to develop those capabilities. The third principle is that long-term domination requires continuous innovation and capability building. The competitive advantages that got you to the top won't keep you at the top indefinitely. You need to continuously develop new sources of competitive advantage while maintaining your existing advantages. This requires significant ongoing investment in research, development, talent acquisition, and strategic positioning. Innovation becomes more challenging when you're at the top because you have more to lose from failed experiments. But innovation is also more critical because your competitive position depends on staying ahead of competitors who are trying to catch up. The key is developing innovation processes that allow you to experiment and develop new capabilities without risking your core competitive advantages. The most sophisticated long-term dominators create what I call innovation pipelines. These are systematic processes for identifying, developing, and implementing new competitive advantages continuously. They have research and development efforts that are working on next-generation capabilities, while their current-generation capabilities are dominating markets. They're always 1 or 2 generations ahead of their competition in terms of capability development. The fourth principle is that maintaining dominance requires different leadership skills than achieving dominance. When you're climbing toward the top, you can be single-minded, aggressive, and narrowly focused. But when you're at the top, you need to be strategic, patient, and broadly aware. You need to manage multiple constituencies, handle complex trade-offs, and make decisions that affect entire ecosystems. Leadership at the top also means taking responsibility for industry development and market evolution. Dominant players have the power and responsibility to shape their industries in ways that serve their long-term interests. This might involve setting industry standards, influencing regulatory development, or creating market conditions that favor your continued dominance. The fifth principle is that long-term domination requires continuous competitive intelligence and market awareness. When you're at the top, you become a target for every ambitious competitor in your industry. You need comprehensive intelligence about what your competitors are doing, what new entrants are planning, and what market developments might affect your position. This intelligence gathering needs to be more sophisticated than the competitive research required when you're climbing toward dominance. You need early warning systems that alert you to competitive threats before they become dangerous. You need scenario planning capabilities that help you prepare for different competitive futures. You need strategic advisors who can provide outside perspectives on your competitive position. The sixth principle is that maintaining dominance often requires sacrificing short-term profits for long-term position. The investments required to stay ahead of competition might reduce your current profitability, but they're essential for maintaining your competitive advantages. This requires disciplined capital allocation and the courage to make investments that might not pay off immediately. Long-term dominators understand that competitive position is more valuable than short-term financial performance. They're willing to accept lower margins if it helps them maintain market share. They're willing to invest in capabilities that won't generate returns for years if those capabilities will be necessary for future competition. The seventh principle is that long-term domination requires managing success psychology. Success creates psychological traps that can undermine continued dominance. Overconfidence makes you underestimate competitive threats. Complacency makes you reduce competitive effort. Arrogance makes you ignore market feedback and competitive intelligence. The most successful long-term dominators maintain what I call paranoid humility. They're constantly worried about competitive threats, even when they seem to be winning decisively. They're humble about their capabilities, even when they're clearly superior to competitors. They maintain the hunger and intensity that got them to the top, even after they've achieved their competitive goals. Success psychology management also involves maintaining team motivation and organizational culture when you're winning. It's easy to maintain competitive intensity when you're losing and need to fight for survival. It's much harder to maintain that intensity when you're winning and success seems assured. Long-term dominators create organizational cultures that maintain competitive paranoia and continuous improvement even during periods of success. The eighth principle is that long-term domination requires ecosystem management. When you're at the top of your competitive hierarchy, your success affects suppliers, customers, partners, competitors, and other stakeholders. You need to manage these relationships in ways that support your continued dominance while creating value for the broader ecosystem. This might involve helping your suppliers become more capable so they can better support your competitive requirements. It might involve educating your customers about industry developments that affect their businesses. It might involve collaborating with competitors on industry initiatives while competing with them in markets. The ultimate goal of long-term domination is creating sustainable competitive advantages that compound over time rather than decay. You want to reach a position where your competitive advantages become stronger automatically as time passes, rather than requiring constant effort to maintain. This requires building competitive moats that deepen themselves and competitive capabilities that improve through use rather than wearing out. The most successful long-term dominators create what I call competitive flywheels. These are business models where success creates the resources and capabilities necessary for continued success. Every victory makes the next victory more likely. Every competitive advantage creates opportunities to develop additional competitive advantages. Success becomes self-reinforcing rather than self-limiting. Achieving this level of sustainable dominance requires thinking about competition as a long-term strategic game rather than a series of short-term battles. You need to build competitive advantages that will still be relevant decades from now. You need to create market positions that will remain valuable even as industries evolve. You need to develop capabilities that will continue providing advantages even as specific competitive situations change. The ultimate measure of competitive success isn't winning once. It's creating the conditions for winning permanently. Long-term dominators don't just defeat their current competitors, they make future competition unlikely or impossible. They don't just succeed in today's markets, they shape tomorrow's markets in ways that guarantee their continued success.